Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. This is Pastor's Point of View number 353. This is being released May the 9th, 2025. And in this particular session, episode, if you will, of Pastor's Point of View, we have a prophecy update for you today. If you'll take a look at our preview slide, here are the three major categories that we want to cover. Number one, societal sins. There are certain sins that society will embrace at the time of the end, according to Scripture. I want to give you an update on that development. We want to talk about persecution. What does the end times reveal about persecution of God's people? How is the world being prepared for that global persecution in the end times? And then I want to reveal to you also a little bit about apostasy, the departure from known truth. And I'll show you a clear example where that is predicted and where it's happening. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and start with societal sins. Notice, if you will, Revelation 9, verses 20 and 21. I believe this is related to the one of the trumpet judgments in the book of Revelation. I believe this is trumpet judgment number 6, and it says, "The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, so as not to worship demons and the idols of gold and silver and of brass and of stone, which can neither see nor hear nor walk, and they did not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their immorality, nor of their thefts." Now, that verse is instructive because it reveals the 7 major sins that will dominate the earth during the tribulation period, things that mankind will not repent of, and this is why God is bringing judgment. You see there on the screen where we have them listed: demon worship, idolatry, murder, sorcery, immorality, thefts, and spiritual indifference. And in both of these slides, the last one and this one, we have murder circled. Murder, or the taking of an innocent life for malicious reasons or premeditated reasons, or for purposes of convenience, will become dominant on the face of the earth in the last days. In other words, that sin will become normalized. We know that that is coming because of Revelation 9, verses 20 and 21, but it's also given, this prophecy, in Matthew 24, verses 37 through 39, where Jesus analogizes the circumstances related to his coming, yet future, to the days of Noah. He says, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah, for as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." What's the world going to be like when Jesus returns in his second advent? It will be just like the days of Noah. Well, what were the days of Noah like? We have to go back to Genesis 6, verses 11 through 13 to learn about that. It says, "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence." Genesis 6:12, it says, "God looked, and behold, it was corrupt, for humanity had corrupted its way." Verse 13 of Genesis 6, it says, "Then God said to Noah, the end of humanity has come upon me, for the earth is filled with violence because of people, and behold, I'm about to destroy them." So you'll notice in verse 11 and verse 13, there we had the Hebrew word for violence, which, by the way, sounds a lot like the modern name Hamas, coincidentally. We note that violence and widespread murder is going to envelop the earth in the end times, and this is one of the reasons God is going to send judgment of the tribulation period. And this explains why the people will receive judgment, because they won't repent of that societal sin in addition to the other societal sins that are mentioned in Revelation 9, verses 20 and 21. So unprecedented violence is coming. And for that to happen, murder, as we know it, has to become sort of mainstream. It's got to become sort of normalized. And that's what you see demonstrated here in this particular article from CBSnews.com, April 9th, 2025. It says, ancient altar found in Guatemala, in a Guatemala jungle, apparently used for sacrifices, especially children, archaeologists say. So the article says this, an article from the TO, and I'm most probably going to mispronounce this, but I think it's TOT Hucan culture at the pre-Hispanic heart of what became Mexico was discovered in Tikal National Park in Guatemala, the center of Mayan culture, demonstrating the interaction between two cities, Guatemala's culture and sports ministry, announced this week. Lorena Pais, the archaeologist who led the discovery, said that the altar was believed to have been used for sacrifices, especially children. Now, this, to me, is very, very interesting for a couple of reasons. One reason I'm going to bring up in just a second. It involves the normalization of murder by our academic elite. But the other reason I find this interesting is we've been told by the politically correct historical revisionists that all the bad people are the Europeans that came here and sort of, destroyed the life of the natives of this part of the world. Christopher Columbus, of course, is demonized constantly in that regard. But I would encourage you to read a book. I don't have a screenshot of it, but it's by Dr. John Eidsmoe. It's called Columbus and Cortez, Conquerors for Christ. And it lays out very clearly what these natives were doing to each other. Massive violence, like what has been unearthed in this particular article. Human sacrifice, especially involving children, before the Europeans showed up. And this is a part of the historical analysis that gets omitted constantly. If you listen to modern historical presentations, it's the Europeans did all the evil, and the natives were just here living kind of a peaceful life, sort of singing kumbaya around the campfire. And Eidsmoe makes the point that that is not historically true at all. I mean, there was mass mayhem, murder, using people's heads as soccer balls in their version of soccer, cannibalism. And these people needed to be subjugated. And if you can't say the Europeans could come over here and subjugate them, then you can't argue that the Allies either could intervene to stop the Nazis, during the World War II era. That's the thesis that Eidsmoe makes in his book, Columbus and Cortez, Conquerors for Christ. Certainly the Europeans were not perfect, but the natives were involved in a lot worse. And so, an article like this to me is very interesting because it shows you the massive violence that was taking place, according to these archaeologists, as they're studying this new, recently earthed up temple. But the second reason I wanted to bring this to your attention is the statement by someone named Maria Belén Menendez. In fact, I think we have a screenshot of her statement. The article says this, Mendez, an archaeologist, was not involved with the project, but she said the discovery confirms that there has been an interconnection between both cultures and what their relationships with their gods and their celestial bodies was like. We see how the issue of sacrifice exists in both cultures. It was practice, Notice what she says here. It was a practice. It's not that they were violent, is what she says. It was a practice. It's not that they were violent. It was just their way of connecting with celestial bodies, she said. So child sacrifice, in her view, the fact that this altar was used for sacrifices, especially children, is really not violent. I mean, there's leftist, politically correct, woke academia for you. And what she just did is she normalized murder, which is basically what our culture is doing today, with the whole subject of abortion. I mean, nobody wants to call it murder. Nobody wants to say that every time an abortion occurs, a heart stops beating. What they instead want to say is it's a personal choice, it's a matter of privacy, it's for convenience, and really what abortion comes down to is it's child sacrifice on the altar of economic prosperity. Boy, I've got less dependents, I've got more disposable income. So an abortion for the sake of convenience is okay. So it's not even called murder, it's called a choice. Those that advocate it are not called anti-life, they're called pro-choice. So what we're seeing in our culture with statements like we just read and modern day abortion is the normalization of murder. I remember, and we covered this on prior shows, but when that insurance executive was shot several times in the back, insurance executive in broad daylight, I couldn't believe some of the things that people were saying. I couldn't believe what Elizabeth Warren, senator, I believe, of Massachusetts, was saying that, people are just kind of outraged and they're upset about insurance and they have to have some way to express themselves. So what she just did is she just took cold-blooded murder and she normalized it. That's what this Maria Belén Mendez just did in this particular article. I remember the same thing happening with the Menendez brothers. You might remember them. They've been in the news recently because I guess they've come up for certain hearings and that kind of a thing. Basically what they did is they murdered their parents in cold blood. It was first degree, premeditated murder. And once their parents were gone, boy, they sure lived the good life, running up the credit cards and everything else. And Leslie Abramson at the time, this goes back to the 1990s, successfully argued to a jury, and fortunately subsequent litigation kind of reversed what victories Abramson enjoyed at that time. But she argued, after all, it really wasn't murder because the parents were abusing the kids. And even though there was no imminent threat to Eric and Lyle Menendez, the fact that they murdered their parents for deeds done in the past is just legalized revenge. We shouldn't look at it as murder. And she was actually temporarily successful in making that argument. And when I saw that happening at the time, I said, well, there it is. There's the normalization of murder. The pro-abortion people do it constantly, the normalization of murder. You see it in this article here. This child sacrifice at this altar wasn't murder. Don't call it violent. It was just their way of connecting with celestial bodies, the scholar says. So this is the type of culture and world that we're living in, where murder itself is looked at as normal. And that is the very thing that Revelation 9 verses 20 and 21 says. This non-repentant attitude towards the callous taking of another life is going to bring God's judgment to this earth. And Christ's days of Noah parallel fleshes that out as well. Let's switch gears if we could, and let's move into our next category, which has to do with persecution. We know that in the end times, God's people are going to be persecuted. In fact, that's going to reach a fever pitch in the tribulation period itself. Notice this slide here with Revelation 17 and verse 6. John in the book of Revelation says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And down in verse 15, it said, he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Now, harlot, as we've said before, is an image for false religion. Peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues is descriptive of universalism, describing the harlot's universal influence. And you'll notice that in the end, this harlot is going to be drunk. And what is she drunk with? She's drunk with the blood of people. And it's not just people's blood that she is drunk with. She is actually drunk with the blood of the saints. And what that indicates to us is violence or persecution against God's people will explode in the end times. And so we're living in a world today where one of the most underreported or unreported features is violence that is being aimed at Christians. So let me bring to your attention this particular article dealing with Nigeria, I believe setting the stage for what's coming against God's people by way of persecution. This one comes from morningstarnews.org, dated April the 15th, 2025. The title of it is Dozens of Christians Slain and Kidnapped in Benue State, Nigeria. Thousands flee unchecked violence since March 28th. The article says Fulani attacks on predominantly Christian areas of the state of Nigeria, Benue State, if I'm pronouncing that right, Nigeria, have killed dozens of Christians since March the 28th, area sources said. And there's a lot of description about this in this particular article, so I would encourage you to download it and read it. But moving towards the end of the article, it says Christians in Nigeria have said that they believe herdsmen attacks on Christian communities in Nigeria's Middle Belt are inspired by their desire to forcefully take over Christian lands and impose Islam, as desertification has made it difficult for them to sustain their herds. Nigeria remained among the most dangerous places on earth for Christians, according to Open Doors 2025 World Watch List of the countries where it is most difficult to be a Christian. The very last sentence of the article says Nigeria ranked 7th on the 2025 WWL list of the 50 worst countries for Christians. So they're in Nigeria because of Islam. It's open season on Christianity. And I hope people understand this. Jesus said, I believe it's in John 16 around verse 2, we don't have a screenshot on this, but he said, the time is going to come where people are, as he's speaking to his disciples in the upper room, the time is going to come where people are going to kill you. And when they kill you, they will think in their minds that they're doing God a service. Now, I can't think of a better description of Islam than that. Everywhere Islam grows and gains influence, it always results in persecution against God's people, Bible-believing Christians. And so that's why I'm concerned with some of the issues that we have dealt with in prior shows, how Islamic enclaves are being built at different places in the state of Texas. Consult other shows that we've done to get more documentation on this. But this martyrdoms in Nigeria, I mean, who is it that you can remember on mainstream media has reported on this, even in so-called conservative outlets? I mean, who has reported on this? I mean, it's one of the most underreported, if not unreported, stories out there, and yet it's happening. And I believe the reason it's happening is prophetically significant, It's setting the stage for a global persecution of Christians that we know is coming in the tribulation period. Notice this particular picture of what Nebuchadnezzar saw in Daniel chapter 2. To make a long story short here, everything from the ankles up is a past empire. The feet of the Antichrist and his empire are yet future. The feet made of iron and clay, 10 toes, if you will. When you cross-reference it with Daniel 7, verse 24, verse 23, right in there, you'll see it speaking of a 10-region, 10-king confederation that will envelop the earth and will become tyrannical. And because these feet are connected to the legs of iron, we know that these feet, yet future, are coming, first of all, from the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome, because they're connected to the legs of iron, which represent the eastern and western divisions of ancient Rome. So because the feet are connected to the legs, we know that the feet, the empire of the Antichrist, global tyranny, is somehow connected to ancient Rome, and so it will initially rise, we believe, out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome, and it will have its day in the sun, but it will be overthrown ultimately by that stone cut without human hands that you saw there in the statue, that will strike the base of the statue, causing the whole statue to crumble. And as those pieces are laying on the threshing floor, wind will drive them away, and the stone cut without human hands will grow till it fills the earth. And so this is speaking of the second advent of Christ and the kingdom, which will last forever, that he will orchestrate. So Satan's agenda here is limited. However, we see totalitarianism arising, don't we? We see it arising in Europe. That doesn't surprise us, because we know that's where the cultural inheritance of the Antichrist empire will come from. And so seeds of totalitarianism are being planted in Europe as we speak. To help us understand that, notice this particular article from cauldronpool.com. April 14th, 2025, and it says this: asking someone to speak English in England could be a hate crime, police warn. This is just an unbelievable article. I want to read it, and then after I read it, we're going to play you a short video showing you this recently happened. It says an elderly man in the UK has been warned by police that telling someone to speak English in England, of all places, would be considered a hate crime. A video of the incident currently going viral across social media begins with the officer asking a man for video evidence after he allegedly told someone to speak English, explaining that such a remark might be classified as a hate crime. The officer said, apparently during some conversations between yourself, apparently you've alleged, we weren't here, so I don't know if you said it, but you've alleged to have said, speak English, or words to that effect. The elderly man responded, I said speak clearly. A woman off camera then explained that the man was deaf and had simply asked the person to speak clearly so he could understand them. Despite the clarification, the officer presses the issue, explaining that such a remark could be perceived as a hate crime. That's fine, the officer replied. That's why we've just come to speak, because potentially someone could perceive that as a hate crime. If someone said to me, officer, I believe this, then we need to look at it, because someone is potentially reporting it as a hate crime. The video surfaces amid escalating tensions in the UK, where many native Britons feel that the establishment is enforcing a two-tier system of policing and justice, one that, in their view, unfairly marginalizes them on the pretext of uplifting global majority groups. So here is this pathetic situation in the UK. You can understand why our Vice President J.D. Vance, in a recent speech in Europe, I think he was in Belgium, when he made this speech, called Europe out on this, that you're going backwards on everything that you've ever understood about free speech. And when those from Europe, I think it was from the UK, if I remember right, came to the White House, Vance said it again, and of course they, quickly denied it or tried to sweep it under the rug. But we're going to show you a video in just a second where it's actually happening, and let me just set the table for it. We already saw the explanation in the article. It's a man who's elderly that appears to have hearing problems. And someone came to him, and he did not say speak English. He said speak up. And people interpreted that as him discriminating, exhibiting hate towards a non-English speaker. They made it sound like he said speak English. And you know what? Even if he said speak English, so what? I mean, who cares? Is that criminal? But he didn't even say that. He just said speak up. And as the officer there is making the inquiry, you can see another elderly person in the back saying, no, he didn't say that. He's hard of hearing. He just said, speak clearly. And the officer said, well, these things could be perceived as a hate crime if you say speak English. And the guy in the back, watch his body language. He is just disgusted at what he is hearing from this officer. So this is illustrative of how any concept of what we know in America as free speech, First Amendment, is disappearing in Europe, and I think it's preparatory for the totalitarianism that the Bible predicts is coming in Europe. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and watch this video. It's a little less or under a minute, so let's go ahead and watch this at this time.
Some of this interaction with the mayor? No? Because if you do, that would be really handy for us, but apparently during some conversations between yourself, apparently you have alleged, we weren't here, so I don't know you said it, but you've alleged to say speak English, or words to that effect?
Speak clearly.
Speak clearly.
No,
Okay.
the gentleman's partially deaf,
Yeah, he
Okay.
can speak clearly.
Yeah.
so I couldn't even hear him.
No, and that's fine, and that's why we've just come to speak, because potentially someone could perceive that as a hate crime.
Did we just know this was going to happen, didn't we?
People, if someone says to me, officer, I believe this, then we need to look at it, because someone's potentially reporting to me a big crime.
And just when you thought things could not get any scarier or even weirder in the UK, in Europe, you run into this live shot of this. So I don't know if I need to offer more explanation on it. It is what it is. It's the vanishing concept of free speech and the movement of Europe in a totalitarian direction. It's real comforting to say, well, I'm glad we live here in the United States, North America. These kinds of things don't happen here, do they? Well, think again. Notice this particular article from the GellerReport.com, April 10th, 2025. It's describing what's happening now in the very woke blue state of Colorado. The title of the article is Lose Custody. Colorado passes a bill that states misgendering your child is child abuse and allows the state to take the child away. Unbelievable. Here's what the article says. Calling your child by birth pronouns or birth name is now means to remove a child from the home. David Strom says if your child is named Karen but wants to be called John, you could lose custody of your child in Colorado if House Bill 1312 passes the Senate and gets signed by Governor Jared Polis, as seems likely. The very end of the article says, quoting someone, Democrats advancing a controversial bill that would effectively classify misgendering and dead naming as child abuse in custody decisions. And now it's heading to the Democratic-controlled Colorado, where it likely will pass. Oh, my word. I mean, the worst penalty I can think of the government imposing is taking a child away from their parents. I mean, that's a terrible penalty. What is happening in the UK is terrible too, because they're criminalizing speech. So on what basis can your child be taken away? Well, if the child is a young boy but wants to be referred to as a girl, and you keep referring to the child as a young boy rather than a girl, then you're dead naming the child. That's the fancy name for this. You're misgendering the child, and here comes the police taking your child away from you. Should this bill become a law in Colorado, and it looks like it's on its way to a very fast passage if it hasn't passed already, that is just blatant totalitarianism. That goes directly against the Hebrew Shema, which means listen, and you'll see that in Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 7. It says, "Hear, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. These words which I have commanded you today shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." I mean, it's very clear here in this ancient principle given, 3,500 years ago, that parental authority over children is to remain with the parents. They're the authority, not the state, not the public school. Of course, a parent could delegate that authority to a tutor, a school, in some cases, if that's their choice, a public school. But children belong to parents. They don't belong to the state. And in no circumstances, unless it's some kind of abuse, I suppose, in no circumstances can the state take away a child from his or her parents. Yet that's what's about ready to become law in California, under something as silly as dead naming, misgendering. If you don't promote some sort of transsexual narrative in the household, then it's illegal. And we're going to come and we're going to take your children away from you. If that is not the horrific specter of totalitarianism, I don't know what totalitarianism looks like. This is totalitarianism on steroids. And we're not talking about something abroad. We're not talking about something overseas. We're talking about something that is taking place right here in the late, great United States of America. Take a look here along those same lines. Take a look here at this article from WJLA.com, March 31st, 2025. It is describing something that is taking place in Fairfax, Virginia. And I wonder, where is the so-called conservative Republican governor? I think his name is Glenn Youngkin, if I've got that right. Where is his voice on this? Because we need his voice desperately on this. And as far as I can tell, he said very little, next to nothing. I would love to be wrong on that if people could send me the documentation. But the title of this article is A is for Abortion. Controversial posters create some parental uproar in Fairfax County. And here is what the article says. It says, a parent of a West Springfield High School student told Fairfax County public school leaders her concerns about obscene and inappropriate posters that line the hallway of the school. The display in the school hallway shows a picture of a letter of the alphabet, along with a word and a corresponding illustration. For instance, A is for abortion. T is for a trans woman. And of course, Q is for queer. The abortion poster has an illustration of a hanger. And of course, that's the pro-abortion line that, oh my goodness, if we completely illegalize abortions in the United States, then we're going to go back to back alley abortions, and we're going to have X amount of deaths per year because of back alley abortions. That, by the way, is a figure, when you study the issue, that largely was made up by Bernard Nathanson, a pro-abortion person at the time, one of the thought leaders in the pro-abortion movement, and he converted to the pro-life view, and he basically said we had to have that hanger back alley abortion argument, and we had to repeat it enough times, because if you repeat a lie long enough, people will believe it's true, believe it's so. He said we had to repeat that over and over again to get our movement rolling. So whenever you see these hangers and back alley abortions and certain statistics quoted, understand that that's largely theater and political propaganda. So it's interesting that next to A for abortion, they hung or they show this hanger. The abortion, continuing with the article, the abortion poster has an illustration of a hanger. Not only does this display violate the district's own controversial issues policy, it also violates President Trump's executive order ending radical indoctrination in K-12 schooling. Are you ready to lose that $168 million in federal funding? The article asks. The article goes on and it says our children are being insulted and indoctrinated in public schools as test scores plummet, while our incompetent leaders in Fairfax County in Virginia stand by and cheer. I mean, you would think with declining SAT scores that the focus of teachers and administration would be reading, writing, and arithmetic, real history, but no, they want to get into all this politically correct nonsense and hang these woke posters for all of their children in the public school system to see. The last sentence in the article says, as of Monday, March 31st, the display was removed only because Women's History Month was over, according to a spokesperson with the Fairfax County Public Schools. I mean, I'm glad that the poster was removed, but the truth of the matter is it shouldn't have been put up in the first place. And I can't think of anything more totalitarian than to require your children through compulsory education to attend a particular government school and then to indoctrinate those children that you brought into the world in a worldview that's contrary to your own. And this is what compulsory education has become, even in a moderately red state like Virginia. This idea that you assign woke concepts for each letter of the alphabet, can I show you how America used to be? I think we have a screenshot of this. It's the New England Primer. This later became the McGuffey Reader. And this is how Americans used to be taught how to read. This is how all of our founding fathers, for example, were taught to read through the New England Primer. It has different letters of the alphabet, but it doesn't put something woke or abominable next to each letter. It uses something biblical. So what does A stand for? In Adam's fall, we sinned all. C, Christ crucified for sinners died. D, the deluge drowned the earth around. By the way, if you're homeschooling your kids, this is the New England Primer is a great way to teach them the alphabet. J, Job feels the rod, yet blesses God. N, Noah did view the old world and new. Z, Zacchaeus, he did climb the tree for our Lord to see, close quote. And I look at what's going on in Fairfax, Virginia with their poster, and I just want to weep. It just shows me how far and how fast America has fallen. It's a satanic, perverted inversion of the way things used to be in the United States of America that made us the greatest country on the face of the earth. But it's just another example of creeping totalitarianism. So with all that being said, I want to go to our final category here, dealing with apostasy. Apostasy refers to the departure from known truth. And if you want to do a prophecy update, you've got to broach this subject at some point, because mainline professing evangelical biblical Christianity, according to biblical prophecy on the eve of the rapture, will start to run off the rails prophetically by way of truth. Paul, in his latter writings, talks about this frequently. Here's just one verse as he's describing the end of the church age. He says, "For the time will come," I might add, and now is, "for the time will come when the church will not," were they, members of the church. Remember, this is a pastoral letter. It's a letter written by Paul to a pastor, Timothy, who's seeking to be a pastor at the church at Ephesus. This is one of our 3 pastoral letters, meaning the other 2 are 1 Timothy and Titus. So when Paul talks about this, he's talking about circumstances in the church in the last days. It's very similar to what he says a chapter earlier in 2 Timothy 3, verse 1, where he says, "In the last days, perilous times will come." Not might come, but will come. So this is the latter times, doctrines of demons coming into the church. 1 Timothy 4, verse 1. This is the end of the church age, the church on the precipice of the rapture, the eve of the rapture. "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires, and they will turn away their ears from the truth and turn aside towards muthos," which is the Greek word for myths. That's what people will prefer to hear in the pews of the church at the end of the very church age that we are enjoying today. So do we have an example of it? Yes, we do. There's a recent Facebook post that has been put out by Chuck Smith Jr. on dispensationalism. Chuck Smith Jr., of course, is the son, one of the sons, I should say, of legendary Chuck Smith Sr., who is the spiritual father of the Calvary Chapel movement, which became a worldwide movement, the Jesus movement. And yes, it did have what we would call today contemporary worship, but it also had a great emphasis on Bible teaching verse by verse. It had a great emphasis on end times prophecy, which is a product of teaching the Bible literally verse by verse. And it had a great emphasis on bringing back Bible exposition into the pulpit. And what you see amongst some of the younger men, not all, because I know Calvary Chapel guys that are great guys and would never acquiesce to this. I've heard testimonies by even members of Chuck Smith's own family, his brother, one of his daughters, for example, that want to stick with what the progenitor of the Calvary Chapel movement, Chuck Smith Sr., taught. So I'm not broad brushing here. I'm just telling you what some of these younger men are doing and what their attitude is towards the theology and belief of their father. And I'm using this as an example of apostasy. So this has to do with a recent Facebook post, and someone had to send this to me. I don't follow Chuck Smith Jr. on Facebook, so that's my source for this, but it's a recent Facebook post made April 22nd, 2025, where he is not just trashing his father, but he is trashing the theology of his father and the belief system of his father, because in his mind, he knows better. And because he thinks he knows better, he's actually leading his segment of Christendom into greater golden calf apostasy. But let's look at what he wrote, and let's see if we can analyze it. I'll stop at certain points to make comments. Chuck Smith Jr. writes, quote, "My dad's teaching on the end times was based on a dispensational interpretation of the scriptures, and more specifically the notes found in the Scofield Bible original edition, not the latter edition that corrected many errors in the first edition." So what he's doing here is he's building what we would call a straw man argument against dispensationalism. Dispensationalism is just the product of a literal interpretation of the whole Bible. And he's trying to connect dispensationalism that his father believed in with the Scofield Reference Bible. There's some great things, by the way, in the Scofield Reference Bible, but I myself, a dispensationalist, am not a clapping seal for everything in the Scofield Reference Bible. Because one of the things the Scofield Reference Bible teaches is the gap theory, you know, the world before the world that Satan ruined with his fall, including a pre-Adamic race, which means, if you believe that there was death for Adam, before Adam, that goes right against Romans 5, verse 12, and that's how the Scofield Reference Bible explained the appearance of age in the fossil record. I believe the gap theory is not exegetically correct, and we don't even need the gap theory to explain the fossil record, because the Genesis flood written by Henry Morris explains that. So as he's trying to draw the connection between the Scofield Reference Bible and dispensationalism, which is just the product of literal interpretation of the whole Bible, understand that he is building us a straw man argument, because not all dispensationalists, myself included, are clapping seals for the Scofield Reference Bible. Chuck Smith Jr. goes on and says, if you are not familiar with dispensationalism, it is a fundamentalist. These guys love to call names. A fundamentalist meaning a negative caricature. You know, a fundamentalist used to have a positive caricature, because under R.A. Torrey and others, we had published the Fundamentals of the Faith around 1920, which was the conservative stand against liberalism that denied Moses wrote the Pentateuch, denied Daniel wrote the book of Daniel, denied miracles, denied the virgin birth, denied a messianic understanding of Isaiah 7 verse 14, etc., etc. And so there was the fundamentalists reacting against that. So in that sense, I'm a fundamentalist. There's nothing wrong with being a fundamentalist rightfully, when the word is rightly understood. But of course, he's using fundamentalist as sort of a toothless hillbilly. You're kind of a knuckle-dragging guy approach to things. You might even believe the earth is flat. And I hate even saying that, because there is a flat earth movement today, and everybody gets mad at me every time I criticize it. But folks, the earth is not flat. The earth is a sphere. There's no conspiracy in NASA to lie to us, to tell us the earth is flat. But he's trying to connect that mentality with dispensationalism, which I wholeheartedly reject. He's developing a logical fallacy known as a straw man argument, where you misrepresent what your opponent teaches, and then you tear down not what your opponent teaches, but your straw man that you have created, supposedly representing your opponent's views. And it's called a straw man because it topples over quickly. That's what Chuck Smith is doing in his war against his father's dispensational theology. He says, if you're not familiar with dispensationalism, it is a fundamentalist approach to Bible study that divided human history into set periods which God had a specific agenda. No, we're not dividing human history. We're seeing how the Bible divides human history. There's a big difference, Chuck. He goes on and he says the end times mark the final dispensation. See, he doesn't even understand what it is he's criticizing. The end times are not the final dispensation. The millennial kingdom is dispensation number 7. The end times, the 70th week of Daniel, is not part of the kingdom dispensation, nor is it part of the church age. The church age is the 6th dispensation. The millennial kingdom is the 7th dispensationalism. So my goodness, if you're going to criticize a belief system, at least understand what it is you're criticizing before you shoot your mouth off, as Chuck Smith Jr. is doing here. My dad's teaching on the fulfillment of prophecy was built on the same dispensational foundation as Hal Lindsey, Tim LaHaye, Jack Van Impe, and many others. Notice what he just did here. He didn't quote any authentic, credentialed dispensational scholars. He doesn't quote Ryrie. He doesn't quote John Walvoord. So this is a misrepresentation, because I've sat under many of his father's sermons where he referenced these luminary scholars like Walvoord frequently. But he wants you to believe that his father got all of his views from popular level teachers like Jack Van Impe. He goes on and he says 1948 was a tipping point for Bible teachers like Dad. After 2,000 years of not having a land of its own, Israel once again became a nation. For many dispensationalists, this provided a definitive timeline for the return of Jesus. That is because they interpreted Jesus' teaching to mean that the generation that witnessed the return of Israel to the land would continue up to the Lord's return. Now, I'll explain in a minute that no, that's Hal Lindsey's interpretation, but not all dispensationalists like myself believe that. Hold on for that coming explanation, which Chuck Smith Jr. doesn't want you to know about. Dad calculated the length of a generation to be 40 years, since the generation of Israelites that came out of Egypt were stranded in the wilderness for 40 years. For Dad, that meant Jesus would return 40 years after Israel became a nation, which would have placed it sometime in 1988. Because Dad believed in a pre-tribulational rapture, the sudden removal of the church from the earth, in other words, he figured that 7 years prior to Jesus' return, the church would be taken up. Dad is on record claiming that the rapture would happen sometime in 1981. Whoops, Chuck Smith Jr. says. And he's right about that. His father took sort of the Hal Lindsey approach, and it has to do with the terminus a quo, which is Latin for beginning point. When Jesus said in Matthew 24, this generation will not pass away, what's the beginning point? Lindsey, and I was in the classroom with Dr. Pentecost as he criticized Lindsey's view. So don't think that Lindsey, with this interpretation, which unfortunately Chuck Smith Sr. fell into, is the dispensational interpretation. But it's the idea that Israel became a nation in 1948, and then all you have to do is figure out what a generation is from 1948, the terminus a quo being May the 14th, 1948, and let's say a generation is 40 years, you can then calculate 40 years from May the 14th, 1948 will be the rapture. A lot of prophecy teachers are still going down that road. They're just changing the word generation to something longer than 40 years. They're going to Psalm 90 or other passages. Or they're saying, no, the terminus a quo is June the 5th, 1967, when Israel became a nation again. And all of these prophecy teachers are incorrect in their terminus a quo. And his dad, unfortunately, went down this road. But what I'm trying to get across is that is not the standard dispensational interpretation. There's a completely different, valid interpretation of this generation that fits the biblical data. But Chuck Smith Jr. doesn't want you to know that. He wants to put up this silly Facebook post, and he wants to create this straw argument and disparage dispensationalism in the process and move the church away from dispensational teaching in his sectors, in his sphere of influence, which is harnessing apostasy. Because as the church moves away from dispensationalism, which is just the product of a consistent literal reading of the Bible, they are moving away from truth. That's why I'm pointing this out to you as doctrines of demons entering the church at the end of the church age. His Facebook post continues. After that, he became a little more conservative, making statements like, I'll be really surprised if the rapture doesn't happen in 1983. What if my dad's and the others' only mistake was determining the length of a generation? Disclaimer, I don't believe that was their only mistake. I'm convinced that dispensationalism was derived from a dubious method of biblical exegesis and interpretation, and that the biblical use of generation was not that technical, but used more loosely. All I intend to do here is to tease my dispensational friends. Why are you being sarcastic with your dispensational friends? Are you ever sarcastic, teasing your amillennial friends, your postmodern friends? I mean, when was the last, Chuck, Facebook post you put up against, let's say, R.C. Sproul or someone like that? I mean, it seems like your sarcasm and your teasing is just a wee bit selective, if you want my opinion of your so-called Facebook post. He says, all I intend to do here is tease my dispensational friends with another conspiracy theory because that's the dispensationalists, seem to relish such things. See the straw man continuing? He's misrepresenting our understanding of this generation. I'll explain it in a minute. He's misrepresenting our so-called allegiance to the so-called Scofield Reference Bible. And he is misrepresenting the fact that it's only the dispensationalists that are into conspiracy theories. Do you know who one of the biggest conspiracy theories is in the world today? It's a guy named Alex Jones. And look what he says about dispensationalism. He hates it. So if you want to aggressively tackle a group of people that are into conspiracy theories, don't aim your guns at dispensationalists. Aim them at the true conspiracy theorists in our world. He says the generation that died in the wilderness were at least 20 years old when they left Egypt, so that they could push the number of years of the youngest among the cohort to at least 60. However, what if we use another passage to calculate a full lifespan, increases the number of years marking a generation? For instance, the days of our years are but 70 years, and if in great strength, 80 years. Psalm 90, verse 10, Robert Alter's translation. You know who's messing this up? A guy named Amir Sarfati. Sorry, everybody gets mad at me when I mention his name, but I have to mention his name because he's the primary one today at a popular level that is pushing his understanding of this generation. He's got the terminus a quo wrong, and he's got the length of a generation wrong. And so he, just like Senior, is misunderstanding what this generation actually means. And they're coming up with dates that are non-biblical. This is who Chuck Smith Jr. is criticizing in the article, making it sound like all dispensationalists are doing this, and we are not. One conclusion we could draw is that the rapture is definitely not pre-tribulation. Another is the generation beginning in 1948 would end in 2024, and then the Great Tribulation. Wow. Think of it. That would mean the current president. Boy, you got to throw Trump under the bus too, don't you? Because your politics, Chuck Smith Jr., are leftist. You're a progressive. Think of it, that would mean our current president, interesting he doesn't criticize Biden, criticizes Trump. Think of it, that would mean our current president is walking our nation straight into the most terrible period of human history with absolutely no preparation for it. And then he puts in parenthesis here at the end, no need to respond to this post, especially if you don't have a sense of humor. Well, if I created a bunch of theological errors and straw man arguments, I wouldn't want people responding to my post as well. And by the way, notice the category that he puts anyone in that would dare criticize his words. You have no sense of humor. So a dispensationalist has no sense of humor. A dispensationalist, according to him, is a conspiracy theorist. A dispensationalist, according to him, believes in building dates for the Lord's return, the rapture, or whatever, based on the misnomer of this generation. And of course, a dispensationalist is slavishly devoted to the Schofield Reference Bible. And he's saying that was a problem with my dad. By the way, Dad is dead, so he's not here to defend himself, which makes you, Chuck Smith Jr., a coward. I mean, anybody can criticize anyone if they're not there to defend themselves. And this is what he's using to move his sector of Christendom away from dispensational thinking. Let me just clear up this generation thing, because people are getting this wrong. Junior is correct to point out that Senior is getting it wrong, and I am correct to point out that Amir Sarfadi is getting it wrong. The reason they're all getting it wrong is they're not starting with the right point. It's the terminus a quo that you have to think about. Where does this generation start? Everybody wants to start at 1948. Hal Lindsey, who I appreciate, started at 1948. Dr. Pentecost, a true dispensational scholar in the classroom, in a class I had for him called Daniel Revelation, straightens everything out. The terminus a quo is wrong. If you want to know where the terminus a quo or beginning point is, it's not May the 14th, 1948. May the 14th, 1948 is just preparatory for the 70th week of Daniel, but it has nothing within it to start a clock. The whole context of Matthew 24, this generation will not pass away, is Jesus says it's the generation that sees all these things. What generation is that? Back up in the passage, back up to verse 15. And you'll see the specific generation that he's talking about. He's speaking to the Jews in Judea who must flee into the wilderness because they are going to be persecuted by the satanically possessed beast. That generation, that's the generation that will not pass away. And we know prophetically they're going to need a lot of help. That's why they're given that promise. Because Satan, Revelation 12, verses 6 through 17, will be cast off the earth and will cast out of heaven and will plummet to the earth, there we go, and will pursue that generation with great wrath. That's the generation of Jews that see the desecration of the temple midway through the tribulation period that Jesus makes the promise to. It's got nothing to do with 1948. And straightforward, bread and butter, scholastic and academic dispensationalists of a scholarly pedigree will tell you that. But Chuck Smith doesn't care what a scholar says. He wants a straw man argument. So he goes to misunderstandings that his father had, getting them from Hal Lindsey, Jack Van Impe, etc., all in an attempt to bash something that is healthy for Christianity, called dispensational truth. And so Chuck Smith Jr. is playing a role in the internal movement of the church away from truth. Chuck Smith's Facebook friend that sent me this FB post writes this about Chuck Smith Jr. Here's the latest from Chuck Smith Jr. This comes from a guy who does meditation from his church and rings a Buddhist bell after each point he makes. Yikes. You want to talk about messed up theology, Chuck? Let's have the conversation. This FB friend, whose anonymity I'm going to protect, says, I have known Chuck since he was a teenager, Chuck Jr. that is. He suffered extreme depression. His first wife left him with their 5 kids. He contemplated suicide. His dad, senior, while he was still alive, removed him from Calvary Chapel Church in Dana Point. I think he also ministered in San Juan Capistrano area, but removed him from that church because he placed religious icons and candles in the church, and was crossing himself from the pulpit, a Roman Catholic sign. He now has meditation in his fellowship and rings a Tibetan bell. He is a mess. And you want to talk about people with bad theology, Chuck Smith Jr., we can have that conversation. It's not your straw man that you have created, it's you. You're the problem. You're the one with bad theology. And I'm very grateful for Calvary Chapel brethren that want to stay the course and have spoken out against this and spoken out against you for years. Here was my commentary when I received this Facebook post. I wrote, this is a jealous, little, insecure person who lived in the giant shadow of his father for so long that now he is acting out against him long after his death. His father is now not even here to defend himself. Sheer cowardice. You see the same pathetic dynamic at work with Andy Stanley versus Charles Stanley, Frankie Schaefer versus Francis Schaefer, and yes, little Ronnie Reagan versus Ronald Reagan. So this is why I bring some of these things to your attention related to apostasy. It's interesting how these children of these luminaries, spoiled children in some cases, spend their whole lives acting out emotionally against their father, now gone, not there to defend themselves. Men that God used greatly, Charles Stanley, Francis Schaefer, Ronald Reagan, now being attacked by Frankie Schaefer, Ronnie Reagan, and now we have Chuck Smith Jr. And because of this generational change, we're moving into what I think is the apostasy of the church. So in this particular episode, we covered at least 3 things: societal sins, persecution, and apostasy. There's some good news in the whole thing, though. As these dark storm clouds envelop the earth, there's good news looking for the blessed hope, Titus 2:13. And the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. The world, as the late Adrian Rogers said, is growing gloriously dark. Against the dark background of these prophetic events is the shining light of Jesus, that he's coming to rescue his own from the earth before the wrath of God is poured out. And you can be tied into this promise and many others simply by placing your trust or faith in the person of Jesus Christ. And as you do that, as you place your faith in the person of Jesus Christ, you receive his wonderful promises, the forgiveness of your sins, the assurance of salvation, but not the least of which of these promises is the promise of the participation in the any moment imminent appearance of our Lord in the rapture. Just a couple of infomercials really quick by way of closing. Make sure you go to the App Store and get the Andy Woods Ministries app. Just type in Andy Woods Ministries into the search engine and download our free app and enjoy all of our content. You can also enjoy Pastor's Point of View in podcast format. Just type in Andy Woods Ministries into your podcast search engine and you'll be able to enjoy Pastor's Point of View in podcast format. Also go to our website, andywoodsministries.org, to get all of our content as well. And there's a conspicuous way on the homepage to sign up for our show notes. So the links that I use on these shows will show up in your inbox every Friday when we post a Pastor's Point of View show. If you're thinking about seminary education, consider Chafer Theological Seminary that I am the president of. We're just embarking now on getting ready for the summer schedule, summer courses. So this particular slide here has information on it. It's got phone numbers and websites and everything else, deadlines that you can consult. It's got our course offering for the summer. So if you're thinking about taking some seminary courses, we invite you to check that out as well. Our new journal is out and we've got a fresh one coming out soon. I've got an article in that one coming out on 2 Thessalonians 2:3a, which I believe is not an apostasy passage, departure from the faith passage, as most are misrepresenting it today, but it's actually a synonym for the rapture of the church. So that academic and scholarly article will be coming out soon, amongst many others, but you can find articles of this quality at our Chafer journal entitled Pneumatikos. And then last but not least, finally, my new book, The Bible and Voting, is out. There's a QR code where you can find that, get your hands on that, and learn how to vote biblically. That's all we have today for Pastor's Point of View. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. God bless you.